Israeli Prime Minister Bejamin Netanyahu underwent surgery to implant a cardiac pacemaker and is feeling great, according to his doctors. This comes as Parliament prepares to vote on a bill on Monday that would curtail the Supreme Court's powers.
I feel great, but I must listen to my doctors. Up until the past few minutes, I have been talking with my colleagues, making the necessary arrangements. I hope that an agreement will be reached. But in any case, the doctor said that I will be free tomorrow afternoon, discharged from the hospital, and will be able to go to the Knesset to vote. Thank you.
Meanwhile, Israel's parliament will be meeting in a few hours from now. The meeting, called on a Sunday, is crucial. The very first of the bills of the contested judicial reforms will be presented today, after which debate and discussion over the bill will begin before a final vote on Monday. The Bejamin Netanyahu-led government is set to win the vote as it sits in a comfortable majority in the single-chamber Knesset. And this is how people are reacting to the development. A sea of Israeli flags converged in Jerusalem on Saturday evening. Thousands of demonstrators entered their last leg of a 4-day march from Tel Aviv to Israel's parliament in Jerusalem. Thousands of protesters marched for over 70 kilometers. The crowd will now camp there until Monday's vote. Meanwhile, over 100 former Israeli security leaders, including retired army chiefs, police commissioners and heads of intelligence agencies, signed a letter to Prime Minister Netanyahu. The letter blames Netanyahu for compromising Israel's defense and urges to halt the legislation. Thousands of reservists who compose the backbone of Israel's armed forces have announced in recent days that they will not serve if the legislation passes. 7 straight months of the most sustained and intense demonstrations culminated in scenes like these. Now, the planned judicial overhaul calls for sweeping changes. The changes are aimed at curbing the powers of the judiciary, from limiting the Supreme Court's ability to challenge parliamentary decisions to changing the way judges are selected. While the government says the overhaul is needed to reduce the powers of unelected judges, protesters say the overhaul will push Israel toward autocracy. Monday's parliament vote will decide upon a measure that would prevent the Supreme Court from striking down government decisions for being unreasonable. Proponents say the current reasonability standard gives judges excessive powers over decision-making by elected officials. But critics say that removing the standard, which is already invoked only in rare cases, would allow the government to pass arbitrary decisions, make improper appointments or firings, and open the door to corruption. Now, for more details on this, we are being joined by our correspondent Jody Cohen, live from Ra'anana. Hello to you, Jody. What can you tell us about a Prime Minister's condition? Will his procedure mean a delay in the voting?
Hi, Alison. So Prime Minister Netanyahu has had his pacemaker fitted successfully. Now, this follows a couple of spells in recent times where he hasn't felt well. Remember, he fainted last week, which was attributed to dehydration. And in October, on the Yom Kippur fast day, he felt unwell and had to stay overnight in hospital. His doctors say that he is feeling well now, and the vote is expected to go ahead this week. But the cabinet meeting on Sunday has been delayed. And also there was going to be a meeting between the Prime Minister and Herzi Halevi, the IDF chief. They were going to be talking about the impact of the army reservists, saying that they won't do the voluntary reserve duty. And that meeting was supposed to happen today. That's also been delayed. Remember, 10,000 reservists have pledged not to do their reserve duty in protest against the judicial plans. There's also been a petition now that's been published by Hapit Honistin, the group that represents 20,000 reservists who have pledged that they will continue because they support judicial reform. And this is a reminder that despite the mass protests that we've seen across the country, really going on for 29 weeks now, there are still many people who support judicial reform in some form or other. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu is expected to be released from the hospital on Sunday. The reasonableness bill is being debated today, Sunday, in Parliament. And the voting, that's the second reading, and also the third and final reading. The votes on those are expected to take place on Monday or Tuesday this week.
Right, and Jody, what can we expect next from the protests and the voting in Parliament? Has hope for a compromise run out?
So on Sunday, the protests are continuing. A tent city has been set up near Parliament. The Israel Medical Association is calling on doctors to join in the protest today, and they're going to be holding a meeting today, presumably to discuss whether or not to hold some sort of hospital strike, as they held a limited strike last week as well. Now, tonight, there's going to be a big protest in Jerusalem against the reforms. There's also expected to be a protest in Tel Aviv for the reforms. Meanwhile, Yair Lapid, who's the head of the opposition, he said last week that he's been holding some interesting discussions with some of the coalition MPs in a bid to try and persuade them to vote against the bill. Netanyahu released that video before his procedure saying that he hopes to reach an agreement. The coalition, we know, wants to pass this legislation by the recess. That's the end of July. There are pressure points on Netanyahu, and we've seen the reservists saying that they won't turn up to duty, the possibility of a general strike being discussed, the possibility of a hospital strike, the possibility of some Likud MPs from Netanyahu's own party possibly voting against the legislation, pressure from the United States. We know that President Biden has expressed concern over the pace of these changes. The legislation is expected to pass this week, but nothing is certain.
Right, Jody, thank you very much for keeping us up to date with all the latest details coming out of Israel.
Thank you.